Welcome to Reformed Thinking. You know, usually when we talk about biblical heroes, there's this expectation of, like, immediate courage.
Oh, for sure. It's always decisive.
Right. Like, if you watch a movie script version of these events, the sky opens, the divine voice booms, and the chosen individual just grabs the nearest sword, looks at the sky, and says, I am ready. Send me.
Yeah, there is this huge expectation of instant, flawless obedience.
Ready to go,
Mhm.
no hesitation, complete confidence in the mission.
And, I mean, we crave that, don't we? We like our historical figures to be bold, to be fearless. We want them to stand tall right from the start.
Because it makes us feel secure about the causes they represent.
Precisely. We project our own desire for certainty onto them.
But then you step into the actual historical world of Moses at the burning bush in Exodus, and suddenly that heroic Hollywood script is just completely torn up.
Yeah, it really is.
We're looking at a scene that is, honestly, full of fear, intense arguing, and sheer desperation.
It is the absolute definition of a reluctant response to a divine command. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, and it's startlingly human.
So today, we are taking an intense deep dive into Exodus chapter 4, specifically looking at verses 10 through 13.
And we have a massive stack of sources on the table for this one.
We really do. We are looking at historical research on the geopolitical climate of the Egyptian New Kingdom. We have linguistic commentaries breaking down the original Hebrew text.
Plus some heavy theological notes cross-referencing this event with confessional doctrines regarding the eternal decree and providence.
Right. And the mission for you, as you listen today, is to investigate this collision between human insufficiency and divine sovereignty.
We are going to look at the historical facts to uncover how our excuses for avoiding duty, they often mask a subtle rebellion against the Creator.
We so often view these figures as fearless individuals, but here, Moses is terrified. He is argumentative. He is trying absolutely everything to get out of this assignment.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a man standing before a bush that burns but is not consumed, hearing the audible voice of God, and his response is essentially to argue with the Creator of the universe.
It's wild. It forces you to ask a massive theological question.
It really gets to the root of how we view our own capabilities. Does God's calling depend on human capability, or does his sovereign decree guarantee the supply of what is needed?
And spoiler alert, this is not a passage about building self-esteem.
No, not at all. God does not flatter Moses here. He does not offer a pep talk to make him feel better about his speaking skills.
He answers by revealing his absolute, terrifying sovereignty over human faculties. The issue is whether the living God is faithful to accompany the servant he sends.
Yeah, that is the core tension.
So I want you, the listener, to think about the last time you felt woefully unqualified for a task God placed in front of you.
Like maybe it was stepping up to lead your family in worship?
Or trying to share the gospel with a highly educated, hostile coworker.
Or taking on a new teaching responsibility in your local church.
Right. You look at your own skill set, you look at your own glaring limitations, and you conclude, I am not equipped for this. Someone else would be vastly superior.
That is the precise mental and emotional space Moses is occupying right now.
But to really grasp the weight of this moment, we need to set the historical stage. We are not just talking about a guy who is afraid of public speaking, right?
Not at all. We are talking about 1446 BC, the late Bronze Age.
The era of the Egyptian New Kingdom. What is happening on the ground at this exact moment?
Well, to understand the sheer terror Moses is experiencing, you have to understand the Egyptian machine at this time in history.
It was a powerhouse.
Specifically, we're looking at a period under the crushing weight of either Amenhotep II or Thutmose III, depending on the dating you use. These were not minor regional kings.
They were global superpowers.
Yeah. And Israel has faced over 4 centuries of state-sanctioned slavery. This was a brutal, agonizing reality.
And this situation was not a surprise to God, right? This was prophesied long before it happened.
Spot on. Back in Genesis 15, God explicitly told Abraham that his descendants would be afflicted in a foreign land for 400 years.
And now that affliction is at its absolute peak.
The descendants of Abraham have multiplied drastically, but they are groaning under a murderous policy of forced labor.
We are talking about making bricks under the burning sun, severe beatings by taskmasters, and the horrifying decree to throw Hebrew male infants into the Nile River.
It is a state of total systemic oppression designed to break the spirit of an entire people.
Against that brutal backdrop of suffering, Let us look at Moses himself, because his background is incredibly unique.
It really is a crazy contrast.
For his first 40 years, he was an elite Egyptian prince. He was literally pulled from the Nile and raised in Pharaoh's own household.
The book of Acts in the New Testament tells us he was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds.
He had everything going for him. He had the education, the status, the wealth, the rhetorical training.
But then Providence violently uproots him from that royal position.
He tries to act as a deliverer in his own human strength. He kills an Egyptian taskmaster. He gets rejected by his own Hebrew people who ask who made him a judge over them, and he just has to flee for his life across the desert.
He is sent into total obscurity. For the next 40 years, he is a Midianite shepherd.
Think about the psychological whiplash of that transition.
Oh, it's staggering. He goes from the center of global dominance, walking the marble floors of the greatest empire on earth, to the absolute edge of the wilderness, tending the flocks of his father-in-law, Jethro.
The desert acted as a furnace of affliction that just stripped away every ounce of his royal arrogance.
40 years of talking to sheep instead of diplomats.
Precisely. The man who once thought he was ready to deliver Israel by his own hand, relying on his Egyptian prestige, has been reduced to a nobody in the eyes of the world.
He is an 80-year-old fugitive working a menial job in a barren landscape.
Which brings us back to his objection about speaking. When we hear Moses say he is not a man of words in Exodus 4, our modern minds might just think, oh, he is a bit shy, or maybe he has stage fright.
Yeah, we totally domesticate his fear.
But our sources point out a massive cultural context here regarding how the Egyptians viewed speech.
The ancient Egyptians had an absolute obsession with rhetoric and eloquent speech.
Tell us about that.
They had a specific concept known as the excellent word, or ert, in their language. This concept dictated that any royal emissary, any diplomat, or anyone attempting to speak to the pharaoh needed to possess a flowing, almost divine eloquence.
What does that look like practically? What happens if you do not have this excellent word?
Well, the pharaoh was viewed as a living deity. His spoken decrees were believed to maintain the cosmic order, a concept they called mat.
So it's tied to their whole worldview.
Yes. To approach the royal court, you had to speak with flawless precision, intricate vocabulary, and persuasive brilliance.
And if you fail?
If you stumbled over your words or if your speech lacked the proper rhythm and polish, you were not just considered a bad speaker, you were considered an agent of chaos disrupting the cosmic order. A diplomat without polished speech would be instantly dismissed as a contemptible fool and likely severely punished or executed for insulting the living God on the throne.
Okay, I want to use an analogy here to ground this for the listener. Imagine a disgraced former executive.
Okay, I'm tracking.
He was fired 40 years ago in a massive scandal. Now he is living off the grid in a cabin. Suddenly, someone tells him he has to walk into the boardroom of the most ruthless corporation on earth, pitch a hostile takeover to a board of directors that already wants him dead, and he has to do it without a slide deck, without any current industry knowledge, and oh yeah, he stutters.
It is a terrifying prospect.
So I have to ask you, looking at this historically, was Moses' fear actually a completely rational, logical response to the diplomatic protocol of his day?
I mean, from a strictly human, pragmatic standpoint, your assessment is completely accurate. It was a suicide mission.
Right.
If the success of the mission depended on Moses' ability to out-debate the Egyptian sorcerers and persuade Pharaoh using the rules of Egyptian rhetoric, he would have failed before he even opened his mouth.
But this tension is what sets up the stark contrast between the pagan standards of human prestige and the economy of the biblical covenant.
How so?
The Egyptian system relied entirely on human polish, educational pedigree, and rhetorical brilliance. It was a system built on the flesh.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The covenant of Yahweh relies solely on the spoken word of the self-existent God. Moses is evaluating the divine command using the metrics of the Egyptian court, rather than the reality of the burning bush standing right in front of him.
He is calculating his odds based on Pharaoh's rules, while ignoring the fact that the creator of Pharaoh is the one sending him.
He is trying to measure the infinite God by his own creaturely limitations. But before we get to his specific objection about his mouth in verse 10, we really need to understand the literary context of how he even gets to this point.
Because this entire conversation in Exodus chapter 4 does not happen in a vacuum.
No, God has just broken centuries of silence. And Moses has already offered 3 distinct objections to his calling before we even touch on the issue of his speech.
The dialogue leading up to verse 10 is a masterclass in human evasion.
Walk us through it.
In Exodus chapter 3, God gives the initial command, And Moses first asks, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" He pleads personal insignificance.
Which again makes sense. He's an 80-year-old shepherd.
It makes sense to us, yes. But notice how God answers that objection. God does not answer by building up Moses' self-esteem.
He doesn't say, Moses, you are a great leader. You have hidden potential. Believe in yourself.
No, God answers by promising his own presence, but I will be with you. The answer to human insignificance is divine presence.
But Moses does not stop there.
No, he asks his second question. If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you," and they ask me, "What is his name?" what shall I say to them?
He wants theological credentials. He wants to know exactly who is backing this mission.
And God answers with the monumental revelation of his name, I am WHO, I am Yahweh.
The self-existent, eternal, unchangeable God. The one who depends on nothing, but upon whom all things depend.
Right. So God has answered his identity objection and his theological objection. Then at the start of chapter 4, Moses raises a third objection. But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you.
He questions his own credibility. He is saying, even if I know who I am and I know who you are, the audience is going to reject the message.
And God responds to this third objection with 3 terrifying authenticating miracles.
This is not a minor display of parlor tricks.
Not at all. These signs are highly specific and incredibly symbolic. First, God tells Moses to throw his shepherd's staff on the ground, and it turns into a living serpent.
And the text notes that Moses literally runs away from it.
Yeah, he's terrified. Then God commands him to grab it by the tail, which is the most dangerous way to grab a snake, and it becomes a staff again in his hand.
What is the significance of the serpent? Like, why not turn the staff into a rabbit or a bird?
In Egyptian iconography, the serpent, specifically the cobra or the uraeus, was the symbol of Pharaoh's sovereignty. It was worn on the front of Pharaoh's crown.
Oh, wow.
By turning the staff into a serpent and back again, God is demonstrating that he exercises total control over the very symbol of Egyptian authority. Pharaoh's might is nothing more than a stick in the hand of Yahweh.
That is wild. And then comes the second sign. God tells him to put his hand inside his cloak, right next to his chest. He pulls it out, and it is leprous, white as snow.
A terrifying, incurable, defiling disease.
He puts it back in, and it is instantly restored, like his other flesh.
Leprosy represented ultimate impurity and a living death. By inflicting and curing it instantly, God is showing that he has absolute sovereignty over human health, disease, purity, and life itself.
Finally, God says that if they still do not believe those 2 signs, Moses is to take water from the Nile River and pour it on the dry ground, and it will become blood.
The Nile was the lifeblood of the Egyptian economy and agriculture. It was also worshipped as a deity, the god Happy.
So it's a direct attack.
Exactly. Turning the water from the Nile into blood on the dry land is a direct assault on the Egyptian pantheon. It shows Yahweh's authority over the gods of Egypt and the source of their national prosperity.
Okay, let's pause and look at where Moses is standing. He has just witnessed the Creator exercise absolute terrifying control over physical matter, over biology, and symbolically over the entire Egyptian empire.
Yeah, he's seen a lot.
He has seen a lifeless piece of wood become a living predator. He has seen incurable disease inflicted and removed in an instant. He's seen the promise of turning water into blood. God has addressed his identity, his authority, and his credibility. He's completely surrounded by evidence.
What's fascinating here is that Moses has completely run out of logical defenses. Every rational argument he could possibly make against going back to Egypt has been systematically dismantled by divine revelation and miraculous verification.
Yet, instead of bowing his head and accepting the mission, he still searches for an exit.
He really does.
I want to ask you, the listener, a very direct question. Have you ever been completely cornered by the facts, but your heart still desperately wanted to run away?
We've all been there.
You know, the truth. You have seen the evidence in Scripture. There is no logical argument left to defend your disobedience, but your will is just digging its heels in. You simply do not want to do the thing God is requiring of you.
That is exactly what Moses is doing right here.
He realizes he cannot win a theological debate with God, so he shifts his tactics entirely. He stops questioning God's authority and starts blaming his own biology. He moves from, they will not believe me, to, my mouth does not work right.
This brings us to the actual exegetical breakdown of verse 10. Moses says, please, my Lord, I am not a man of words. When you examine the original Hebrew text, you uncover a severe cognitive dissonance in how he speaks.
Walk us through that. What is the cognitive dissonance?
He opens his objection using the phrase bayashna. This is a highly polite submissive address. It translates to something like, "Oh, my lord," or "Please, my master."
Okay, so he sounds respectful.
Very respectful. He is speaking with the utmost reverence, acknowledging God's superiority and his own subordinate status. Yet in the very same breath, he is actively resisting a direct command from that master.
It is the tragedy of false humility. We see this all the time. We can use all the right religious vocabulary, we can bow our heads, close our eyes, and use a reverent, hushed tone while our hearts are screaming, "No!"
It is a way of dressing up our defiance to make it look like piety. Moses follows this polite address with a threefold temporal excuse. He says he is not a man of words, neither yesterday nor the day before, nor since you're speaking to your servant.
I find the audacity of that last phrase just staggering. Nor since you're speaking to your servant. He is essentially complaining to God, to his face, that hearing the direct, audible voice of the Creator failed to give him a biological upgrade.
Spot on. He is claiming that his speechlessness is a permanent, unchangeable aspect of his identity. By adding "since you're speaking," he is actually making a subtle, passive-aggressive accusation. He is implying that if God really wanted him for this job, God would have instantly fixed his mouth the moment the bush started burning. He is demanding that God alters his biology as a prerequisite for his obedience.
He wants the healing before the obedience. He wants the physical comfort before the step of faith. Moses specifically describes himself in this verse as heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue.
And the Hebrew phrase our sources highlight is selotli.
And this is where the linguistic connections in the text just blow my mind. How does this word connect to the rest of the Exodus story?
This is one of the most brilliant literary features of the Pentateuch. The author, who is Moses himself, reflecting back on this event, uses this identical root word, KBD, later in the narrative, to describe the heaviness or the hardening of Pharaoh's heart.
The word means weightiness, difficulty, or slowness.
Yes. Moses is sitting here complaining about his heavy, unresponsive mouth, but the text is making a direct, devastating commentary on his spiritual state.
So his physical complaint is actually a mirror of his spiritual condition.
Yeah. His heavy mouth is mirroring Pharaoh's heavy, stubborn heart. Both men, the pagan king and the chosen prophet, are displaying a profound resistance to the word of Yahweh.
Pharaoh uses his heavy heart to say, "I will not let them go." Moses uses his heavy mouth to say, "I will not go."
It's a striking parallel.
I look at that and I see so much of our modern mindset reflected back at us. How often do we use phrases like, "I am just not wired that way," or "that just isn't my personality," or "administration just isn't my spiritual gift"?
All the time.
We dress up our disobedience in the language of modesty and self-awareness. We act like our Myers-Briggs type or our introversion or our past trauma is an absolute impenetrable barrier to obeying a clear command from Scripture.
We use them as excuses.
We say, "I cannot confront that brother in his sin because I am conflict avoidant," or "I cannot share the gospel with my neighbor because I'm not an extrovert." We enthrone our physical and psychological limitations and use them as shields against God's commands.
It functions as a sophisticated defense mechanism. We treat our physical or emotional state as though it were the supreme reality, the final authority in the universe, rather than the sovereign decree of the God who created us.
Moses is looking at his tongue
Yeah.
and making it the deciding factor of the mission, rather than looking at the God who is speaking from the fire.
So Moses lays out this biological excuse. He says his mouth is heavy. He implies God made a mistake in choosing him. And God responds in verse 11.
And he does not pull any punches.
No, he does not offer therapy. He does not say, "Oh, Moses, you're being too hard on yourself. Your speech is fine." He asks a terrifying, worldview-shattering rhetorical question: who made man's mouth?
This is a breathtaking assertion of divine sovereignty over human biology. God claims absolute active ownership over human faculties.
He expands the question to say, who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, Yahweh? He takes Moses' fear and places it directly under the theological doctrines of creation and providence.
We really have to stop and let that sink in, because it pushes against everything our modern sensibilities tell us. These physical conditions, being mute, being deaf, having a speech impediment, are not cosmic accidents.
They are not the result of evolutionary chance, and they are not just something God passively permitted to happen while he was looking the other way.
I want to push back on this a little bit because this is where people really struggle.
Yeah.
If we look at our notes on theological frameworks, specifically dealing with God's eternal decree and providence, how do those explain what God is saying here? Because the immediate human reaction is to say, wait, if God actively designed Moses to have a stutter, Isn't it unfair for God to then be angry when Moses points out he has a stutter?
That is the natural human reaction, and it is a vital question to answer. We understand that God from all eternity did freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. That is the decree. But the doctrine of providence clarifies the mechanism. God, the great creator of all things, upholds, directs, disposes, and governs all creatures, actions, and things, from the greatest even to the least, by his most wise and holy providence.
So what does that mean for Moses' mouth?
It means God is not the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures, nor is the liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather established.
In practical terms for Moses.
God deliberately designed Moses' mouth, including whatever physical limitation or stammer he had, for this specific moment in redemptive history. It was an intentional design feature, not a manufacturing defect.
To what end? Why design a broken tool for the most critical diplomatic mission in history?
Because the goal of the mission was not just to get Israel out of Egypt. The goal was to display the glory and the absolute might of Yahweh.
Oh, I see.
If Moses was naturally eloquent, Pharaoh and the Israelites might have credited the Exodus to Moses' persuasive brilliance. By sending a man with a heavy mouth, God ensures that when Pharaoh's empire collapses, everyone knows it was the word of Yahweh that did it, not the rhetoric of a human. God is asserting his absolute, non-dualistic sovereignty over physical creation. He is the sole author of all human faculties.
So God is not surprised by this perceived defect. He did not look at Moses' resume, miss the part about his speech impediment, and then say, oh, well, we are already at the burning bush. We will just have to make do with what we have.
Right. The stammering tongue is a custom-designed tool created by the creator for his own purposes.
To complain about the design is to accuse the designer of incompetence. When Moses points to his mouth as a reason not to go, he is essentially telling the omniscient God that he failed to account for a biological variable.
Okay, so what does this all mean for Moses in the moment?
So what does this all mean? It leads right into verse 12. God issues a direct covenantal command based on this sovereignty. He says, now therefore go. The sovereignty of God over biology does not produce human passivity. It demands action.
That is a crucial connection. The therefore is the bridge between theology and duty.
Right. You do not get to study the doctrine of providence, acknowledge that God is in control of your physical limitations, and then sit on the couch and do nothing.
Wait, you hit the nail on the head.
Because God made your mouth the way it is, therefore you must go and speak.
Yeah.
The limitation is not a release from the command. It is the context in which the command is to be obeyed.
And this command to go is immediately followed by a massive promise of what theologians call monergistic enablement.
Explain that term, monergistic enablement. What does that mean in plain English, and how does it function here?
Well, monergism comes from two Greek words meaning one working. It contrasts with synergism, which means working together. When we talk about monergistic enablement in this context, we mean that the capability to accomplish the task comes entirely from one source, which is God.
Okay, I follow.
God gives a staggering promise to Moses, I, even I, will be with your mouth. He uses the emphatic personal pronoun, echoing the I am of the previous chapter.
Notice what God does not say. He does not tell Moses to go back to Midian and enroll in a public speaking course. He does not demand that Moses practice his rhetoric in front of a mirror till he overcomes his heavy tongue.
No, because that would be synergism. That would be God saying, I will provide the opportunity, but you have to drum up the biological capability. Instead, God pledges to be the immediate ongoing source of the speech. He promises, I will teach you what you shall speak.
I want you, the listener, to absorb this reality because it completely changes how we view ministry and obedience. The adequacy of any servant of God never rests in their innate skill, their IQ, their charisma, or their natural talents. It rests entirely in the promised presence and the verbal instruction of the God who sends them. Think about how kind this actually is. God meets Moses precisely at the point of his greatest fear.
Moses fears his mouth, so God promises to be with his mouth. Moses fears the words, so God promises to teach him the exact words.
It is a perfect, tailor-made provision. It establishes a fundamental principle for the prophetic office throughout the rest of the Bible.
The true messenger does not invent the message. He does not rely on his own cleverness. He speaks as one taught by God. The prophet's authority depends entirely on receiving and declaring the word of the Lord.
You would think this would be the end of the argument. It has to be, right?
You'd really think so.
God has miraculously proven his control. He has claimed ownership of Moses' mouth. He has commanded him to go. He has promised to be with him and teach him the words to say. All the logical loopholes are closed. The theological debate is over. Case closed.
But then we read verse 13.
Moses opens his mouth one more time and says, "Please, my Lord, send by the hand of whomever you will send."
This is the final rejection, and it is a truly tragic moment in the narrative. The phrase Moses uses in the Hebrew text is a classic idiom for total abdication.
What does it literally mean?
He uses an imperfect verb without an expressed subject. It translates essentially to send anyone in the entire world except me.
Wow. He wraps it in that polite religious address again. "Please, my Lord." But the substance of his words is pure insolence. It is a flat, unyielding refusal to the face of the living God.
The core diagnosis here is sharp, and it exposes the reality of the human heart. In verse 13, Moses' pious mask drops entirely. This final statement proves that all his previous complaints, his questions about identity, his demand for God's name, his worry about the Israelites believing him, his complaints about his biology and his heavy tongue, they were all tactical maneuvers.
There were smoke screens.
The problem was never his mouth.
No.
The problem was his will. He simply did not want to go. The biological excuse was just the most convenient shield he could find to hide his rebellion.
I compare this to arguing with the GPS system in your car.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Imagine you are driving, and you know you need to go to a certain destination. The GPS gives you the fastest route. You look at it and say, "No, there is traffic on that road. I don't want to go that way."
Yeah.
So the GPS recalculates and finds a back road.
Right.
You look at the back road and say, "No, that road has too many potholes. It will ruin my tires." The GPS recalculates again and finds a perfectly paved highway. You say, "No, the scenery is boring on that highway. I'll fall asleep."
Yeah, you just keep making up stuff.
Eventually, after the GPS has answered every single objection and provided a flawless route, you just turn off the car, cross your arms, and say, "I am not going."
Yeah.
You kept making up reasons why the route was bad, but eventually you have to admit the truth.
Yeah.
You just refuse to go to the destination.
That is a phenomenal analogy for how unbelief operates. Unbelief is incredibly stubborn. It can survive even after perfect doctrinal correction and a flawless promise of grace.
Yeah, it really can.
When a divine command is clear and the divine promise of presence is sufficient, continued refusal is not prudence. It is not humility. It is not a sign of being self-aware of your limitations. It is barefaced rebellion.
We see that rebellion clearly.
Yeah.
And God's anger is kindled against Moses in the very next verse, which we won't cover in full today. But God ends up giving him Aaron as a mouthpiece, a concession to his weakness that ends up causing immense trouble later with the golden calf.
Yeah, that does not end well.
But I want to zoom out and ask a macro question.
Mm.
This whole embarrassing exchange, this massive failure on Moses' part, is permanently recorded in the book of Exodus. Moses wrote this. Why?
It's a great question.
Think about the original Israelite audience wandering in the Sinai desert. They were reading or hearing this account. Why would the author, guided by the Holy Spirit, include such a humiliating, unflattering portrait of their great leader?
It is one of the great proofs of the authenticity of Scripture. Ancient Near Eastern propaganda always elevated leaders to godlike, flawless status. But the wilderness generation needed to know the truth about their deliverance.
They needed to know that Moses was not a silver-tongued political opportunist who convinced Pharaoh to let them go through sheer charisma. They needed to see his absolute reluctance.
Why was that so crucial for them?
Because if Moses had been presented as a self-confident, articulate hero, the Israelites might have credited their liberation from Egypt to his human brilliance, his negotiation skills, or his military strategy.
But by showing that their leader was terrified, physically deficient, and highly reluctant, the narrative proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that their miraculous liberation could only be credited to the monergistic work of Yahweh.
The Exodus was God's work from beginning to end. Moses was just a heavy-mouthed instrument.
It shatters any boasting in human leadership, and it shows us something about the nature of the Old Covenant. Moses is the great mediator of the Old Covenant. He's the one who goes up the mountain, speaks with God, and receives the law.
Yet he is highly flawed. He is hesitant. He is trembling. He represents the absolute inability of human flesh to perfectly obey the commands of God.
He even requires a human crutch, a spokesperson in his brother Aaron, because of his weakness and his stubborn refusal to trust God's promise about his mouth.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to the whole redemptive storyline of Scripture, we see a massive typological contrast between Moses and Jesus Christ.
Let's break that down. How does Moses point us to Christ by failing?
Well, Moses is the mediator of the old economy. which is marked by human weakness, reluctance, and the need for constant mediation.
Right.
Christ is the mediator of the new covenant, where Moses made endless excuses, where he tried to avoid his calling, where he argued with the Father at the burning bush. Christ entered history with absolute joyful submission.
Think of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, facing a terror infinitely worse than Pharaoh. He says, "Not my will, but yours be done."
Yeah. He declared, as the author of Hebrews points out, "Behold, I have come to do your will, O God."
And think about the contrast in their speech. Moses complained of a heavy tongue. He felt he lacked the words, that his mouth was broken.
But Christ is the eternal Logos, the Word made flesh. Christ needed no Aaron to speak for him. When Jesus spoke, he did not stutter. He spoke with intrinsic, terrifying authority.
The crowds in the Gospels were astonished because he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. He commanded the wind and the waves, and they obeyed.
He spoke to the dead, and they lived. He established an everlasting covenant of life through his perfect, willing obedience.
Moses' weakness magnifies the need for a perfect mediator. The Old Covenant had a mediator who argued with God about his biological limitations.
The new covenant has a mediator who is God himself, taking on human flesh, possessing a human mouth, and using that human mouth to speak the words of eternal life in flawless, unflinching submission to the Father.
That is a breathtaking contrast. This brings us to the application for today. We have looked at the history, the language, the theology, and the Christology. But how does this text from 3.5 millennia ago speak to the modern church right now?
It functions as a devastating polemic against the pragmatism that has infected so much of modern church practice.
Let's define our terms for the listener. What do you mean by pragmatism in this context?
Pragmatism is the belief that whatever works, whatever gets results, is what we should do, regardless of biblical principle.
Yeah.
In the church, it means adopting the exact same pagan Egyptian assumptions that Moses was worried about.
We assume that success requires slick marketing, flawless production value, polished rhetoric, and highly charismatic personalities.
We think we need the excellent word of the Egyptian court, the mert, to win our culture. We look for pastors who look like CEOs and speak like TED Talk presenters.
We evaluate ministry using the metrics of Pharaoh rather than the metrics of the burning bush.
When the Creator wanted to confront the strongest, most intellectually advanced, militarily dominant empire on earth, he completely bypassed all the polished diplomats. He bypassed the rhetoricians.
He chose an 80-year-old stammering shepherd who had just spent 40 years talking to livestock. Why?
Because the victory comes through the Spirit, never through the enticing words of human wisdom. Yet we have built entire models of ministry around finding the most attractive, articulate communicator, assuming that human charisma is the engine of spiritual success.
This passage dismantles that entire philosophy. The capability belongs to God speaking through his word. The preacher, the evangelist, the parent teaching their child, they're all just heralds under orders.
The messenger's confidence must never be in their own impressiveness, their own vocabulary, or their own biological wiring, but entirely in the fact that God has spoken and promised to accompany his word.
I want to address you directly as you listen to this. Where are you deploying false humility in your own life?
Where are you using polite religious language to mask active rebellion? Are you avoiding evangelism in your neighborhood because you think you are not articulate enough, you don't know enough apologetics, and your tongue is too heavy?
Are you neglecting leading your family in daily worship because you feel you lack formal theological training and you stumble over your words when you pray out loud?
Are you staying silent in your workplace when you should stand up for confessional truth, blaming your social anxiety or a fear of conflict?
It is a challenge we all have to face, myself included. We have to realize that pleading ignorance or biological weakness is not a sign of a humble, self-aware spirit when God has clearly commanded you to act. It is practical atheism.
Practical atheism. That is a heavy charge. Explain how false humility is practical atheism.
When you say, "I cannot," in the face of a direct divine command, you are functionally living as if God does not exist or does not have sway. You are questioning the wisdom of the Creator who designed your physical frame, who decreed your exact limitations, and who placed you in your specific circumstances.
You're telling God that his design is faulty and his promise of presence is insufficient.
We have to stop making our weakness sovereign. We treat our introversion or our lack of speaking skill as if it sits on the throne of the universe.
We have to stop answering the living God with the final authority of our fear.
The central theological assertion we have seen today, rooting all the way down into the decrees of God, is that the sovereign Lord who made the mouth and commands the mission is completely, infinitely sufficient for weak servants.
His promise, "I will be with your mouth," leaves absolutely no room for unbelieving refusal.
Let us recap the massive narrative arc we have traveled today.
We saw Moses in the historical furnace of the late Bronze Age, stripped of his Egyptian arrogance, facing the terrifying prospect of returning to a culture that demanded a divine eloquence he simply did not possess.
We saw him completely cornered by miracles, the serpent, the leprosy, the blood, unable to deny God's authority, yet desperately searching for a biological excuse to run away.
We analyzed the tragic irony of his polite, reverent Hebrew words masking a heart of active resistance.
We witnessed God's majestic, uncompromising claim over human biology, asserting that the mute, the deaf, the seeing, and the blind are all formed by his deliberate decree.
We saw God's promise of monergistic enablement, followed by Moses' stunning, flat-out refusal to go.
And we traced how this exposed the severe frailty of the Old Covenant mediator, pointing us forward to the perfect, willing obedience of Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh, who never flinched at the Father's command.
We saw how this text violently confronts our own modern pragmatism, our obsession with slick communication, and our tendency to hide our disobedience behind the polite mask of false humility.
Weakness is never, ever an excuse for disobedience. God's capability is absolute, and he ordains the specific, seemingly weak, stammering means by which his glorious ends will be achieved.
It is a terrifying text, but it is also incredibly liberating. If God requires perfection of human speech, we are all doomed. But if he only requires a willing submission to the one who makes the mouse, then there is hope for every heavy-tongued servant.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the heavy mouth in your own life right now.
Think about that specific glaring limitation you constantly use as a shield to hide from the burning bush. Maybe it is a lack of education, a physical ailment, a stutter, or a paralyzing fear of man.
If the creator of the universe intentionally designed that precise limitation into your life from before the foundation of the world, what specific glorious outcome might he be trying to accomplish by forcing you into absolute reliance on him?
You know, usually when we talk about biblical heroes, there is this expectation of immediate, flawless courage. But real historical faith is not the absence of weakness. Real faith is stepping forward with a heavy tongue, entirely dependent on the God who made it. Thank you for joining this deep dive into the sources. We will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.